It was a normal Tuesday evening when I found the envelope. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted from another day of mindless meetings, and was mindlessly sifting through the mail. Bills, credit card offers, and then something different, an elegant, glossy envelope. It stood out. The return address was from a photography studio I'd never heard of. My brow furrowed as I flipped it over. In delicate cursive, the name Stephanie was written across the front. My wife's name. I stared at it for a second longer, trying to make sense of it. Why would she receive something from a photography studio? She hadn't mentioned anything about it, and I knew her schedule well enough to know she hadn't gone to any kind of photo shoot recently. At least, not that she had told me about. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside was a thank you card from the studio, thanking her for the wonderful session and offering a discount for future bookings. My heart dropped, and a wave of cold confusion washed over me. I scanned the card again, making sure I hadn't misread it. "We hope you enjoyed the experience," it said. "Your photographer, Mark, enjoyed working with you." Mark. My stomach tightened. I knew the name. Of course, I did. Mark was an old friend of Stephanie's, someone she used to talk about all the time but who had faded into the background over the years. Or at least, that's what I had thought. I stood there for a moment, the card trembling slightly in my hand. My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, each one worse than the last. Why hadn't she told me about this? Why was she going to a photography studio? And why with him? Mark. What the hell was going on? I found myself pacing the living room, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation, but none of it made sense. I could hear the sound of the front door unlocking. Stephanie, back from her evening yoga class. I shoved the envelope into my pocket, heart pounding. "Hey, babe," she called out as she walked into the room, her smile warm and oblivious. "How was your day?" I forced a smile in return, my pulse racing. "It was fine," I said, the words feeling like they belonged to someone else. I watched her closely, searching her face for any sign that something was wrong, anything that would betray her secret. But she moved through the room with ease, like nothing had changed. As if she wasn't hiding anything at all. But I knew better now. I had the envelope. The proof was right in my pocket, burning a hole through my jacket. Something wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. The card had been sitting in my pocket for days, like a loaded gun I wasn't ready to fire. I kept glancing at it, unable to shake the growing pit in my stomach. Every time Stephanie smiled at me or kissed me goodnight, the weight of that envelope became heavier. I had to know more. I had to understand what exactly was going on. So, on a Thursday afternoon, I found myself standing outside the photography studio, heart pounding in my chest. The place was tucked away on a quiet street, almost hidden between a florist and a coffee shop. Nothing about it seemed special. Just a modest glass door with the studio's name etched neatly across it, Lumiere Studio. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. A young woman at the front desk smiled brightly, her fingers tapping away on a keyboard. "Hello, how can I help you?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, I'm here to check on a recent session. My wife, Stephanie, came in for a shoot recently, and I just wanted to confirm some details." The woman glanced at her computer screen and nodded. "Sure, just give me a second." She typed for a moment, her expression shifting into a polite, professional mask as she pulled up the records. "Ah, here we are. Yes, Stephanie had a session just last week. Is there anything specific you wanted to know?" I could feel the tension tightening around my chest. Yeah. Actually, could I see the photos? I want to make sure they're ready for us to review." The woman hesitated for a second, probably wondering why I was here instead of my wife. But after a pause, she nodded and turned the monitor slightly toward me. "Of course. They're still in our system." I wasn't ready for what I saw. There, on the screen, was my wife. But not the version of her I knew. She was posed in a way I'd never seen her before, intimate, vulnerable, and unmistakably sensual. The lighting was soft, almost dreamlike, her body draped in sheer fabrics that clung to her skin, accentuating every curve. These were not ordinary photos. These were something else entirely. My heart pounded in my ears. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut. Who was this woman? Who was this version of Stephanie I had never met? My stomach churned with a mix of disbelief, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. Then I saw his name. In the corner of every image, delicately watermarked, was the photographer's name, Mark. Mark, her old friend. I felt sick. My hands clenched into fists. Nails digging into my palms as I tried to contain the rage boiling up inside me. It wasn't just the photos, it was him. He had been the one to capture her like this, in ways I had never been allowed to see. Is everything all right? The receptionist asked, her voice distant, like I was underwater. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Mark, her old friend. The guy she swore was just a friend all these years. And now he was the one behind the camera, seeing her in ways I never had. Known things about her I didn't. My mind raced with 100 questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? What else hadn't she told me? I snapped back to the present, realizing I had been standing there too long, staring at the screen like a fool. Why yeah, everything's fine, I muttered, forcing myself to sound composed. Thanks. I'll let her know everything's ready. I could feel the receptionist's eyes on me as I turned and left the studio. But I didn't care. My thoughts were spinning too fast, and the images burned into my mind. My hands were shaking as I opened the door and stepped back into the street. The truth hit me harder than I could have imagined. This wasn't just some harmless photo shoot. This was a betrayal. I couldn't get the images out of my head. They played over and over like a cruel slideshow, each one twisting the knife deeper into my chest. The softness in her eyes, the way she let her guard down in front of him, it wasn't just a photo shoot. It couldn't be. There was something more, something I hadn't seen until now. Why hadn't she told me? Why would she keep something like this a secret? I thought back to all the times we'd sat together at the dinner table, laughing about our day or talking about the future. I thought of the nights we spent together, wrapped in each other's arms, when everything seemed simple and right. Was it all just a lie? The suspicion gnawed at me, eating away at every memory we shared. If there was nothing to hide, why the secrecy? Why let Mark, of all people, be the one to see her like that? She used to talk about him casually, like he was just some harmless relic from her past, someone who belonged to her college years before me. But now, those memories felt tainted, corrupted by something I hadn't been able to see before. Had there always been something between them? Was I blind this whole time? My mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of our life that suddenly felt unfamiliar. I thought back to that night when we first met. It had been at a small art gallery, one of those pretentious events where everyone pretends to understand the abstract paintings on the walls. I didn't understand them, and I told her that, which made her laugh. I remember thinking how real she seemed, how unguarded. She was everything I didn't know I was looking for, and from that moment, I was hooked. We built our life together from that spark, slowly but surely. But now it felt like I didn't know who she was anymore. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have hidden something like this from me. She wouldn't have kept secrets. Unless there was something to hide. The thought lodged itself deep in my mind, festering like an infection. I tried to shake it off, but the more I tried to rationalize, the worse it got. Maybe it wasn't just a photo shoot. Maybe this had been going on for longer than I knew. Maybe Mark was more than just an old friend. The signs were subtle, but now they felt obvious in hindsight. The extra time she spent on her phone, the late nights at work that suddenly seemed questionable. The way she'd brush off my questions with a smile and a quick kiss, telling me not to worry. Had I been a fool this entire time? Was I so blinded by love that I ignored the truth right in front of me? My mind kept spiraling back to the idea of them together. Not just in front of a camera, but something deeper, something physical. The thought of it made my skin crawl. I could almost picture them. Her laughing at his jokes, the way she used to laugh at mine, the way she might have touched him. It was too much. I couldn't believe it, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I trusted her. I had always trusted her. But now that trust felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. Every glance, every word she'd said in the last few weeks now felt like a clue. Was she distracted because she was thinking of him? Did she smile less because she was hiding guilt? Or was I just losing my mind? The weight of it all bore down on me, suffocating. I tried to recall every moment of our life together, hoping to find something that would reassure me. But all I could see was the image of her in that studio, with him behind the lens. And suddenly, all the love I felt seemed to slip through my fingers, replaced by a hollow sense of betrayal. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away from me, and in her place was someone I wasn't sure I could trust. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream and demand the truth. But at the same time, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face whatever this was. Whatever we had become. If I pushed too hard, if I asked the wrong questions, what would be left of us? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. But I was already in too deep. There was no going back. The doubt was eating me alive. Every time I looked at her, my mind raced with questions I couldn't ask out loud. Each night when she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, wondering what she was hiding. The air between us had become thick with unspoken words, tension building with every passing day. I had to know the truth. I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, after she'd gone to bed, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand, I made my move. I'd been thinking about it for days, rationalizing it, convincing myself that this was the only way to know for sure. It was a line I never imagined I would cross, but here I was, staring at her phone, my hand trembling. With a deep breath, I grabbed it and walked into the living room, feeling the pulse of guilt in my chest. I knew I shouldn't do this. I knew it was wrong. But that voice of reason was drowned out by the pounding in my head. I had to know. I needed to know. It wasn't hard. I knew her password. It was the same one she used for everything. A combination of her birth date and some random numbers. My fingers moved almost instinctively, and within seconds, I was in. My heart was racing, every beat like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I went straight to her messages. The list of names was familiar. Mostly friends and family. But I wasn't here for them. I scrolled, my breath catching when I saw it, Mark. There it was. His name. My stomach lurched as I tapped the thread and the conversation unfolded before me. At first, it seemed harmless. The usual pleasantries, jokes, the kind of banter you'd expect between old friends. But as I scrolled further, my hands began to sweat, my chest tightening. The messages were too frequent. Too familiar. Then I saw it. A message from Mark. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. When can we meet again? My vision blurred. I had to blink several times to focus. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My worst fears were staring me in the face, spelled out in black and white on the screen. Stephanie's response was almost immediate. It was so good to see you again. I've missed how things used to be between us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. I scrolled faster now, desperate to understand just how far this had gone. Each message was worse than the last. They had been meeting for weeks, months, even. There were references to dinners, drinks, and late-night encounters that Stephanie had never mentioned to me. I loved the photo shoot, she wrote in one message. You always know how to bring out the best in me. My hands shook as I continued reading, my mind a blur of disbelief and rage. The playful flirtations, the innuendos, the casual references to being together, it was all too much. I could feel the anger rising in my throat, a bitter taste filling my mouth. Every word confirmed what I had feared from the moment I saw those photos. This wasn't just some harmless reconnection with an old friend. This was something more, something darker. They were having an affair. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. All the little moments that hadn't made sense, all the times she'd been distant or distracted, it was all falling into place now. She had been with him. Behind my back. The person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my pulse quickening as I scrolled through the endless thread of messages, each one a new dagger to my heart. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of their lies. The last message in the thread was from the day before. I'll try to sneak away after work on Friday. Can't wait to see you again. Love you. I stared at the screen. Numb. Love you. Those two words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. She had been saying those words to me for years, but now I realized they were hollow. A lie. My hand tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning white as I fought the urge to throw it across the room. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. The truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. I sat there for what felt like hours, the phone in my lap, the weight of their affair crashing down on me. I had always wondered what betrayal would feel like. Now I knew, and it was unbearable. I sat in the dark, the glow of Stephanie's phone still flickering in my hand, and for the first time in days, my mind was clear. The shock had passed. The sadness had turned cold. Now, there was only anger, pure, seething anger that consumed me with every breath. But it wasn't the kind of rage that made you lash out. No, this was something deeper, something more calculated. I could have confronted her. I could have thrown the phone in her face, demanded explanations, and watched her stumble over her excuses. But I wasn't going to do that. Not anymore. Stephanie had played her part well, deceptive, clever, hiding in plain sight. Now it was my turn. She wouldn't see it coming. As I stared at the messages, my mind began to work, forming the outline of a plan. She cared about her image and her reputation. She was always so careful, so concerned with how people saw her. She worked hard to build her little world, a perfect social circle. A career built on respect, and the adoration of her friends and family. I would take that from her. I would tear it down piece by piece, just like she had done to my trust. Step 1. Access her phone. The door was already open. I knew the password, and I had the messages. But that was just the beginning. I needed to dig deeper. I wanted every secret she was hiding, every piece of dirt that could be used against her. Her social media accounts, her photos, and everything she thought was private would soon be mine. I plugged her phone into my laptop, the screen lighting up as I initiated the sync. It would take time, but once I had full access, the rest would fall into place. I was meticulous and methodical as I downloaded her apps and connected to her cloud storage. Next, I would hit her where it hurt. She had curated her life so carefully, her friendships, her professional relationships, the way she presented herself online. I would break that image. The messages between her and Mark were only the tip of the iceberg. I would leak them, but not in a way that pointed back to me. No, this needed to look like an accident, a technical glitch, something out of my control. I didn't just want her embarrassed, I wanted her humiliated. Step 2. Spread the evidence. Social media was the perfect weapon. With a few keystrokes, a few clicks, and everything could be exposed. I imagined the reactions, the shock, the disgust, the pitying glances from her colleagues and friends. They would see her for what she was. I could almost hear the whispers behind her back, the crumbling of her perfect little life. I would start small, leaking the messages between her and Mark, making sure they reached the right people, friends who were close enough to care, but gossipy enough to spread the news. From there, it would spiral. The photos from the shoot, the suggestive texts, the late-night meetups, it would all come out. Her social standing would be in ruins. Step 3. Destroy her connections. Stephanie thrived on her relationships. She was the glue that held her group of friends together, the one who organized dinners, trips, and parties. But once the truth came out, those friendships would start to crack. I would make sure of it. A well-placed rumor here, a subtle message there, and suddenly, she would find herself isolated, abandoned by the very people she trusted. I smiled bitterly at the thought. She had betrayed me, but I wouldn't be the one who was left alone in the end. Step 4. Watch her fall. This would be the hardest part, playing my role as the clueless, supportive husband while her world collapsed around her. I would have to be patient, and let the plan unfold naturally, never revealing that I was behind it all. It would be painful to act as if I didn't know, to pretend that I still cared, but it was a small price to pay for the satisfaction of seeing her suffer. I closed the laptop and sat back, the plan fully formed in my mind. I would destroy everything she held dear. And she would never even know it was me. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was done. The pieces were in place. All I had to do now was wait. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking control, about making sure that she felt the same pain she had inflicted on me. And when it was all over, when her perfect life lay in ruins at her feet, I would be the one standing there, untouched, watching her crumble. That was my justice. And I would see it through to the end. The decision had already been made. I knew what I had to do. And there was no turning back now. The simple act of going through Stephanie's phone on my own hadn't been enough. I needed more. I needed full access to her life, her emails, her photos, every private message she thought was safe. I needed to know every secret she was keeping, and for that, I needed help. It was a risk, but I had no choice. I didn't have the technical skill to do it myself, but there were people out there who did. People who specialized in this kind of work, who lived in the shadows. Outside the law, I spent hours scouring online forums, buried in the dark corners of the web, searching for someone who could do what I needed. Finally, I found him. His username was Cypher, anonymous, discreet, exactly what I was looking for. His reputation on the forum was solid, with glowing reviews from people who had used his services before. He had hacked everything from social media accounts to corporate servers, and now, I needed him to hack my wife's phone. I hesitated for only a moment before sending the message. It was short and to the point. I need access to a phone. Can you help? Within minutes, he responded. Depends on the phone. What kind of access? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me couldn't believe I was doing this, but it was too late to stop now. Everything. Messages, photos, social media, emails, anything she's hiding. There was a pause. Then his next message came through. It'll cost you. You ready for that? I didn't care about the money. The price didn't matter. All that mattered was seeing this through. Name your price. We went back and forth, discussing the details, how the hack would work, how long it would take, and what kind of access I would have once it was done. He was efficient and professional, no questions asked. He didn't care why I wanted this done, and I didn't offer any explanations. That suited me just fine. We agreed on a price. It was more than I had expected, but I didn't hesitate again. This was the cost of revenge, and I was more than willing to pay it. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I'd handed over Stephanie's phone details to Cypher, and he assured me the job would be done quickly, without a trace. I barely slept, my mind racing with the possibilities of what I might find. It felt like I was on the edge of something huge, like everything was about to change forever. Then, late one evening, the message I'd been waiting for finally arrived. It's done. You've got full access. My hands were shaking as I opened the link Cypher had sent me. It led to a secure server, where everything from Stephanie's phone had been uploaded. I took a deep breath, the weight of what I was about to see pressing down on me, and clicked. Her entire digital life was laid bare before me. Every message, every photo, every video. Things she'd probably forgotten about. Moments she had thought were private, all now in my hands. I started with her messages, the same thread between her and Mark that I had seen before. But this time, I went further back. I wanted to know exactly when it had started, when she had crossed that line. The messages stretched back for months. Flirty exchanges, suggestive jokes, and then, the unmistakable shift into something more. There were nights she had claimed to be working late when she was meeting him. Every alibi she had given me over the past few months was right there, torn apart by the truth in front of me. But it wasn't just the messages. There were photos too. Private photos she had sent him, intimate. Revealing, the kind of images I had never even seen myself. My blood boiled as I scrolled through them, each one more painful than the last. She had given herself to him in ways I hadn't even known were possible. And then there were the emails. Professional at first glance, but hidden between the lines were references to their affair, veiled in vague language and inside jokes that only they would understand. They thought they were being careful. They thought no one would ever find out. But now I knew everything. I sat there for hours, going through every detail of her betrayal, feeling the cold, hard knot in my stomach tighten with each new revelation. I could barely recognize the woman I had married, the woman I had loved. She was someone else now, someone deceitful, selfish, and cruel. This was more than I had expected, more than I had prepared for. But now that I had everything, the plan could begin. I wasn't just going to ruin her reputation, I was going to eradicate it. I would make sure she lost everything that mattered to her, just like she had taken everything from me. I closed the laptop, my mind made up. The hack had given me what I needed. Now it was time to use it. The moment had finally come. Everything I gathered, all the private messages, the photos, the hidden conversations, was ready to be unleashed. It wasn't just proof of her betrayal, it was the weapon I would use to destroy her carefully constructed life. And I knew exactly where to strike. I found the right place, a nameless, faceless forum buried deep within the web. A place where anonymity ruled and secrets were currency. It didn't take long to set up an account, and once I had everything in place, I uploaded it all. The files, the messages, the images, it was all there, neatly packaged, stripped of context, and laid bare for anyone to see. Stephanie's private exchanges, the flirtatious conversations, the photos she'd taken, everything she had guarded so carefully. Now exposed to the world. I made sure to title the post in a way that would attract attention. Something vague, but intriguing, the private life of a perfect wife, secrets revealed. I knew it would spread like wildfire, the kind of scandal people couldn't resist clicking on. I hesitated only for a second before hitting publish. It was done. Her life was no longer her own. I sat back and watched the views climb. Hundreds, then thousands of people clicked on the post, scrolling through the intimate details of her hidden life. The first comments appeared within minutes: disbelief, shock, judgment. Is this for real? Why would anyone post this? She's gonna regret this. What a mess. The train had left the station. I didn't need to do anything else. The truth, raw and brutal, was out there, and it would spread on its own. By the time I went to bed, the damage had already started to spread. I left no trace of myself, no way for this to be linked back to me. It would all look like an unfortunate breach of her privacy. Perhaps a hack, maybe a careless mistake, but no one would ever suspect the man sleeping next to her. The next morning, it began. Stephanie was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, her phone lying on the counter as she scrolled through her messages. I watched from the hallway as her face shifted from calm to concerned. Her brow furrowed as she read something on the screen. Then, a second later, her phone buzzed again. And again. At first, it was just confusion on her face. But then came the panic. She picked up the phone, her fingers moving frantically as more notifications rolled in. I could hear her muttering to herself, her voice rising with each new message. I knew exactly what she was seeing. Friends, colleagues, even family, her entire social network was now dissecting the private details of her life. Her flirtatious texts, the personal photos, the banter with Mark. It was all out in the open, and people were responding. Harshly. She got a call, her mother, I assumed, judging by the way her face drained of color as she answered. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in her voice told me everything. She was trying to explain, trying to keep it together. Her phone rang again, another call from a friend. The same people she had carefully curated in her life were now turning on her. The perfect image she had built was crumbling, and she couldn't stop it. She hung up, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her hands were shaking as the notifications kept coming, each new message a reminder of her ruined reputation. I couldn't hide my curiosity any longer. I walked into the kitchen, trying to look concerned. What's going on, Steph? Her eyes flicked to me, wide and frantic. Patrick, I don't know what's happening. Someone hacked my phone, I think. All these pictures, they're online. Her voice cracked with panic, and her hands trembled as she held up the phone. People are messaging me, asking about, she paused, swallowing hard, about Mark. I raised an eyebrow, my heart pounding, though I kept my voice calm. Mark? What about him? I don't know how, but someone put photos out there. She hesitated, her face twisting in frustration and fear. They're fake, Patrick. They've been altered, photoshopped. You know I'd never do something like this. She tried to sound convincing, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. The lie was weak, a last-ditch effort to save herself from what was already unraveling. Photoshopped? I repeated, my voice tight with disbelief. So you're telling me someone took photos of you and Mark, photos that look real, and made it look like you're, what? Involved? Her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see the guilt eating away at her. She looked down at the phone, scrolling through the messages again, her face flushing with shame. I swear, Patrick, I don't know how they got out. They're not real. Mark and we're just friends. This is all some kind of mistake, I promise. Just friends? I snapped, my voice rising. Do you think I'm stupid? I've seen the messages, Stephanie. You're telling me those are fake too? She froze, her face paling. She hadn't expected that. You've seen them? She whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, I've seen everything. The photos, the texts, the meetings. I stepped closer, my voice cold and sharp. You've been lying to me. Don't even try to deny it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I could see the cracks in her resolve, the way her guilt twisted her words into pathetic excuses. She looked at me, desperate, pleading for me to believe her, to give her some kind of escape. It's not what you think. She stammered. I swear, it's not like that. Mark is just, don't say, just friends, again. I cut her off, my voice ice cold. You think I don't know what's been going on? Do you think I'm blind? Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. She knew she had no defense, no way to explain away the betrayal that was now laid out before us. Her shoulders slumped as the weight of the truth crashed down on her. I let the silence hang between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted her to feel it, the guilt, the shame, the fear of being caught. I wanted her to know that there was no way out of this. I trusted you, I said, my voice low but full of venom. I gave you everything, and this is what you do behind my back. You run around with Mark and then try to tell me it's all a misunderstanding? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't care. She had already destroyed everything. There was no room for sympathy, no room for forgiveness. Patrick, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for any of this. Didn't mean for what? I shot back. Didn't mean to cheat on me? Didn't mean to get caught? She shook her head, sobbing quietly now. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. The words hung in the air, empty and meaningless. Sorry? I repeated bitterly. You're only sorry because the truth is out. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in her guilt and shame, broken by the mess she had created. I didn't need to hear anything else. The day after everything fell apart, Stephanie was a ghost of her former self. I watched as she went through the motions of our morning routine, her eyes vacant, her hands trembling. Each buzz of her phone sent a fresh wave of dread washing over her, a reminder of the chaos that had unraveled her life. It didn't take long for the news to spread beyond our home. The whispers at her workplace grew louder, her colleagues gossiped behind closed doors, and soon enough, the inevitable call came from her boss. I could hear only snippets of her conversation from the other room, but the tone was clear: disappointment, anger, and then the final blow. You're terminated, her boss said. This behavior is unacceptable. I felt a thrill of satisfaction at the sound of those words, knowing that my actions had brought this moment to fruition. As she hung up the phone, the reality of her new life began to sink in. She was no longer a valued employee, she was a pariah. The humiliation didn't end there. With every passing hour, Stephanie faced the fallout of her exposed secrets. Friends texted her with accusations, while others distanced themselves entirely, unsure of how to navigate the disaster that had become her existence. I could see her desperately trying to piece together a semblance of normalcy, but the facade was crumbling. As she walked through the grocery store later that day, I noticed people casting glances her way, some sympathetic, others judgmental. A couple of women whispered behind their hands, shooting her looks filled with contempt. I watched as she froze in place, her face flushed with shame. Is that her? The one from the news? One of them said, loud enough for Stephanie to hear. I can't believe she would do something like that. I was standing a few aisles away, pretending to browse, but I was focused on her. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, relishing the discomfort she was enduring. Every judgment, every whispered word was a reminder of the betrayal she had committed. Just keep your head down, I thought, watching her walk with hunched shoulders, trying to evade the piercing stares. You brought this on yourself. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, her on one end of the couch, me on the other, she looked at me, tears in her eyes. Patrick, I don't understand how this happened. How did my personal life become public? It feels like a nightmare. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was reveling in her misery. Maybe you should have thought about that before getting involved with Mark. I said, my voice cold. You're the one who put yourself in this position. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked away, swallowing hard. You don't understand. It was never supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for anyone to find out. I thought I could keep it separate. Separate? I scoffed. You thought you could live a double life and there wouldn't be consequences? Look at what's happened. You're losing everything, and it's all because of your choices. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, and I could see the truth cutting through her denial. She was losing her job, her friends, her dignity, all because she thought she could have it all without anyone noticing. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout continued. I watched her sink deeper into despair. She applied for jobs, but her reputation preceded her. Each rejection letter felt like another nail in her coffin. I knew how hard she was trying, but there was something satisfying about seeing her struggle. One afternoon, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at her phone. I can't believe this is my life now, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I don't know how to move forward. Maybe you should consider how you got here, I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from seeping into my words. You made your choices, Stephanie. Now you have to face the consequences. Her gaze hardened for a moment as if she wanted to lash out, but she didn't have the strength. Instead, she just looked defeated. A shell of the woman I once knew. And I watched her unravel with a cold sense of satisfaction. Each moment of humiliation felt like a small victory for me, a vindication of my hurt. I had become the spectator of her downfall, and it was both thrilling and terrifying to witness the transformation. This was her reality now, one of her own making. As I observed the wreckage of her life, I couldn't help but feel like I was finally reclaiming my dignity, even if it came at such a high cost to the woman I had once loved. The bar was dimly lit, a perfect setting for a chance encounter. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where I could watch the entrance. The moment I spotted Mark walking in, my heart raced with a mix of anger and satisfaction. It was time to confront the man who had betrayed me alongside my wife. He approached with a casual air, clearly oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Patrick, didn't expect to see you here," he said, flashing that infuriatingly disarming smile. "Yeah, just thought I'd grab a drink," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "You? Same. Just got off work. Busy week, you know?" His nonchalance made me want to punch him in the face. We exchanged some pleasantries, but the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. I had to keep my composure. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a reckoning. "So, how's everything with you and Stephanie?" I asked, feigning casual interest. He hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. Things are complicated. I feel bad about what happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? Really?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You think it was just some harmless fling? You knew what you were doing." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. I know. It was a mistake. We were just reconnecting, but I never wanted to hurt anyone." "Too late for that," I shot back, my voice laced with venom. "You've already done enough damage. My wife's life is in shambles. And it's all thanks to you." He shifted in his seat, his expression a mix of guilt and confusion. I had no idea things would spiral out of control like this. I never wanted her to be hurt. "Yeah, well, it's too late for regrets now," I said, forcing a chuckle that felt hollow. "You're part of the reason her life is a mess. You didn't care about the consequences when you two were reconnecting." "I didn't think it would come out," Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was just between us." I leaned back, letting his words sink in. This was the man who had invaded my life, and yet here he was, acting like a victim. I was filled with a mix of anger and a strange sense of triumph. But beneath that, a nagging doubt began to surface. As we continued talking, I watched Mark squirm. He was feeling the weight of his actions, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But I quickly extinguished that thought. He had chosen to cross the line, to betray not only me but Stephanie as well. "Just know that I'm not done with this," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I won't let you off easy. You might feel guilt now, but it doesn't change what you've done." Mark nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I get it, I do. I just wish things had gone differently." As he left the bar, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I had confronted him, but the satisfaction was fleeting. I couldn't shake the feeling of losing something in this process. Back home, I found Stephanie sitting on the couch, the remnants of her shattered life evident in her expression. She looked up at me, her eyes red from crying. For a brief moment, I considered telling her about the conversation with Mark, but something held me back. As I sat in silence, I began to question the very foundation of my revenge. Did it truly bring me the satisfaction I craved? I had watched her break, and while I felt a rush of power at that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. What had I achieved? She was a wreck, and my heart ached at the sight of her. It was a cruel twist of fate. I had become the very monster I had sought to destroy. As I stared into the void of our living room, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me. Was this a victory? Or had I merely traded one kind of pain for another? The lines blurred, and I found myself standing at the edge of a dark precipice, uncertain of the way forward. As days turned into weeks, the satisfaction I initially felt began to wane. I found myself waking up each morning to a house that felt colder and emptier. The laughter that once filled our home had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence. I thought watching Stephanie's downfall would bring me joy, but instead, it only left me feeling hollow. The reality was sinking in. My revenge hadn't made me happier, it had merely filled the void with bitterness. Each time I saw her, broken, lost, her spirit crushed, I felt a pang of guilt that I couldn't shake off. I had wanted to be the avenger, but now I was just a man drowning in the consequences of his actions. One evening, while I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, memories of better times flooded my mind. I thought about how we used to share our dreams, and our hopes for the future. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago, and now they were just ghosts haunting me. I began to question whether I had made the right choice. Had my desire for vengeance overshadowed the love I once had for her? I found myself thinking about Mark as well. He had been a catalyst for this whole mess, but did he deserve all the blame? He was flawed, just as we all were. I recalled the guilt etched on his face during our conversation. The way he had admitted his wrongdoing. He hadn't set out to destroy my marriage, he had simply stumbled into a situation that spiraled out of control. The more I pondered, the more I realized that revenge hadn't given me the closure I sought. Instead, it had turned me into something I despised. I had become consumed by my anger, letting it dictate my actions and my life. What had once felt like justice now felt like a heavy burden. One night, after yet another day of silence between Stephanie and me, I sat down across from her at the dining table. Her eyes were red, and I could see the weight of shame hanging over her. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, wrestling with the conflict within me. I could continue this cycle of destruction, relishing the chaos I had wrought, or I could take a step back and acknowledge my failings. Neither did I finally said, the words spilling out before I could think better of them. I got lost in my anger. And I don't know if that's who I want to be anymore. She looked up, surprise mingling with vulnerability in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope. "Patrick, I'm not saying I can forgive you," I interrupted, my heart racing. "But I don't want to keep tearing each other apart. Maybe we can find a way to understand what happened instead." As I spoke, I felt a shift within me. The need for revenge was giving way to a desire for reconciliation, however tentative it might be. I was still angry, still hurt, but I was starting to recognize that holding on to that pain wouldn't heal anything. The silence stretched between us, thick with uncertainty. I didn't know what the future held, whether we could rebuild what had been lost or if it was too late. But for the first time, I was willing to entertain the possibility of change. The next morning, I stood by the window, looking out at the world beyond our home. It was a new day, but the fog of uncertainty still loomed large. I was at a crossroads. I could choose to embrace the chaos, to continue my path of destruction, or I could reach for something different, something better. At that moment, I realized that the choice was mine. I could either admit my failings and try to mend the pieces of my life, or I could cling to the darkness, reveling in Stephanie's downfall and sealing my fate. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. No matter which path I chose, it would be fraught with challenges. But in that uncertainty lay the growth potential, a chance to redefine who I was. As I stood there, the sunlight pouring through the window, I felt a flicker of hope, however faint. The road ahead was unclear, but I knew it was time to confront the truth and make a choice that could change everything.